Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Let's now take a look at Obama's State Department speech. The operative part of this, of course, is an ultimatum to Syria that the president of Syria, Assad, has got to lead the reform or get out of power. So an ultimatum by Obama to Syria. Now, ultimatums by the U.S. to various countries. We've seen ultimatums by Mad Dog Bush the Younger to Saddam Hussein. We've seen ultimata by Mad Dog Bush the Elder against Saddam Hussein. We've seen all this stuff. It's when you get China issuing a behind-the-scenes ultimatum to the U.S. and Pakistan issuing a pretty much open one, a warning at least, that's something new. So you look at the Obama speech there, the operative parts are all essentially taking control, taking responsibility for the color revolutions. Now, obviously, he says the color revolutions are all indigenous and spontaneous. Of course, they're not. You can read Obama, the Postmodern Coup, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate, big part in there about Colonel Robert Helvey, Gene Sharp, Albert Einstein Institute, how these things were tested out in particular in Thailand and in Burma. And it looks like in Thailand we have this character, Thaksin, who is a darling of the Council on Foreign Relations, right? The red shirts of Thaksin want to make a comeback. These are attacks on China now, right? We're getting into this phase of direct clash between U.S. and China. Watch the Taiwan Straits, but also watch Thailand and Burma, because new attempts at color revolutions in Thailand and Burma are attacks on the U.S. But back to Obama, he's essentially let the cat out of the bag. The color revolutions belong to me. He says they're spontaneous, but I own them anyway. And in Syria, you better get out. You're committing murder. Very tough language. This also for Libya, right? He's got to go too. Another ultimatum. For the Israelis, no ultimatum. The stuff about the 67 borders, I don't see this the way that Phil does. The 67 borders obviously are a starting point, but with Obama, this is simply window dressing. There's no practical step vis-a-vis Israel. There's no meeting of the quartet. There's no special representative. There's nobody replacing Mitchell. Even this rather weak envoy, Senator George Mitchell, now quit. Nobody replacing them. Now let's just go through this so people know where we stand. This broadcast supports the Geneva Plan, the Geneva Protocols, Geneva Accords of November 2003, Yossi Beilin for Israel, Yasser Abed Rabo for the Palestinians. It is two states. It is Israel and Palestine with the 1967 borders. The settlements must be rolled back. The settlements must be rolled back. Naturally, those people could be compensated. There would be a role there for China, for Europe, for the United States, for all sorts of other people. Saudi Arabia could help to indemnify the settlers, because a lot of them, most of them will have to go, practically all of them. At the same time, the right of return has got to be dealt with as a matter of indemnification. In other words, if you had property, you've got to be compensated, but you're going to be headed back to the PLO state. So obviously you have to negotiate with the new PLO-Hamas combination, but it has to be the Geneva Plan of November 2003. That is reality. Now, nobody likes that. Neither side is going to like that. One side doesn't want to give up the settlements. The other side doesn't want to give up the right of return. 67 borders are not going to make everybody happy. But this is reality, and I think ultimately that is the bedrock in realism, is that. The one thing that I would add is to make all of this more palatable, an economic development program, a Marshall Plan for the region from which all states, underline all, from Iraq to Egypt to Syria to Lebanon, Israel, all of them have to benefit from a regional economic development plan. Short of that, more killing, and eventually they'll get tired of killing. Netanyahu, of course, on his way to clash with Obama, but neither one of these is realistic. Reject both. Reject Obama, reject Netanyahu. Now, a couple of other things that are going on. In Turkey, U.S. building up for an attack on Turkey. This is quite important because of the new regional role of Turkey. Prime Minister Erdogan has talked about an alliance between the PKK, the Marxist ultimately U.S. British-sponsored rebel force in southeast Anatolia, now run with help from the Kurdish part of northern Iraq, run by the U.S. There's an alliance between the PKK and Ergenekon, Ergenekon being the Turkish Gladio, the NATO stay-behind operation, then kicking over into terrorism. So the PKK and Ergenekon of NATO are now working together. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is the PKK is clashing with an organization we haven't talked much about, Hezbollah of the Kurds, the Kurdish Hezbollah, which is not the same as the Hezbollah of Lebanon, but the PKK in a gang and counter-gang situation, destroying society in southeast Anatolia, or threatening to, with these constant clashes. The head of the PKK, Öcalan, or written Öcalan, O-C-A-L-A-N, you know him, he's been in jail for quite a while now, he threatens Turkey with a great war. He says all hell is going to break loose. So an attack on Turkey. At the same time, we see Pakistan obviously on the front burner, Iran also under various attacks. But any nation state in the Middle East will be targeted. The nation state, founded in Milan by Gian Galeazzo Visconti between 1380 and 1390, became prevalent between about 1480 and 1500 with Louis XI of France and Henry VII, Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond in England, something similar in Spain, although more complex, became dominant in Europe in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, sovereign states, European state system, and became dominant worldwide between the 1960s and the 1970s when the colonial empires were wrapped up. That began with India and other places in the late 40s and kept going. The last ones were the Portuguese colonies in the mid-70s, your Angolas and Mozambiques, and so forth. So we now have a world of almost 200 or thereabouts nation states. That's what you have to work with. But the CIA and the British say, no, we're going to sweep them aside. We're going to get rid of them. Now let's look over at the Medvedev press conference. Medvedev trying very hard to look like Putin. Putin constantly giving these question and answer sessions. The difference is that Putin would do it and does it with average Russians, ordinary people, ordinary Russians, but Medvedev does it with the glittering world of the international press. But what he says has to be taken seriously. He's basically saying Putin has been right all along, and the reset, the entire business about the diplomacy with the U.S. has now reached a dead end. Medvedev is talking about the ABM treaty, the anti-ballistic missile treaty. He says the U.S. is not respecting the Russian view of this, and the START treaty, which was just ratified in December, the strategic arms reduction talks, is in a impasse. It could lead to a new Cold War, says Medvedev. When Medvedev talks new Cold War, things getting bad. Back in a minute.